Hi, everybody. This is Eve Harrow on Rejuvenation for the Land of Israel Network. It is Sunday, July 29th, 2019, the 25th day of Tammuz, 5779, the wee hours of today. I got a lot to do on Sunday, so I'm taping this late Saturday night. Also waiting for my daughter to give birth, and I'm supposed to be with her at the hospital. So trying to get everything I can do done when I can do it, because babies come when they come. So want to be prepared. In any event, hoping to share good news with you guys next week. But I had a really interesting last week. I hope you did as well. It was a lot of Tanakh. It was a lot of Bible, but not just learning it, but teaching it and learning it in place. So last Monday, I did a One Israel Fun Tour to Shomron, but not the area called Shomron, the city of Shomron, which is the reason that the area got its name. It was the city that was established by Omri. It was the capital. It was actually the third capital of the Israelite kingdom. So right after Solomon, we split into Israel and Judah. And the first capital of Israel is Shechem, known today as Nablus. The second one is Tirzah. We'll get back to that in a second. And the third one is Shomron, which is very often known as Sebastiya, and I'll explain to you why. That's way, way down the pike, hundreds of years later. In any event, it's established by Omri, and they say that he wasn't a great guy, to say the least. Go read Kings 2. But by building a city in the Shomron, he is zoche, he is privileged to have a son be king. So remember that powerful message. Anyhow, to go around Sebastiya, to go around Shomron, is to deep dive into the Tanakh, and especially into the book of Kings 2, and to stand on the wall and talk about the king, the woman who's standing and looking up at the king who's on the wall of the city, and there's a famine that's going on. The king is probably Yehu, it's not clear. And, he's got behind him his goren and his yekev, his wheat and his yekev, probably olive oil or wine are filled, and the people are starving. And just to stand on the wall and talk about that story, or all the stories with Elijah and with Ahab and with Jezebel, it's a little bit of a question mark. It's not clear. I know both opinions. I've heard both opinions from experts. If this is where the story of Navot and his vineyard happens, right next to the palace of the king. A fascinating story, because it also tells you the limits of the eminent domain, if you will, of the king. He's got to ask Navot. So many things happen there. It is a place that we can only get to now, with the army taking us. The geniuses who came up with the Oslo Accords gave this area, at least the road to this unbelievable city. I mean, really, this is one of the most important tells in the entire country. But there's an Arab village there, and to get there, you have to go near the Arab village. We actually got stoned, not the fun kind. They hit our bus with rocks on the way out, but the army stood their ground and pushed them all away with stun grenades or whatever it is that they had to do. Why? Why would you throw stones at a tour bus? What is the point? Why? But again, I'm thinking rationally in a situation and with people that aren't very rational. But to go up there and to see how derelict the site is, forget any signs or anything like that. And that's why you have to go up with a guide. You have to go with somebody who knows what's going on there. They're now apparently paving a parking lot, and they're going to charge some kind of admission. This is, I don't know under whose auspices this is. It should be a national park under Israel, but Israel has not stepped up and taken care of this site as it should. Something that not just tour guides, but archaeologists and so many people have been so upset for so long. Another thing that I don't understand about the policies of this government. So on the one hand, going there is so exciting. I haven't guided there very often because it is such a hassle. But the field school in the Shomron that's based in that's based in the town called Shomron, which had just had a really devastating fire a couple of days before, and we were able to see that. And One Israel Fund is going to get in there and help them. They have to rebuild some of the dorms, I think, for the yeshiva were burnt down. Anyhow, there's always something to do. So they arranged for the army. The army was amazing, and they were ready. They were there before us, and they took us through. We were the only bus to go in, so it was my timetable. So on the one hand, it's so frustrating to go there and see how this site, and not that there's no paths and no proper rails or anything like that, but I'm sure that they're looting all the time. So that when an Arab comes up to me while we're in the middle of the tour and is trying to sell me coins, I'm thinking, like, where'd you get those coins? Did you dig them here? Like, how much robbery is going on here? And just the fact that there isn't proper supervision there makes me absolutely crazy. On the other hand, that's balanced out by the excitement of being able to guide in a spot like this, where the Tanakh is open the entire time. And it's not just Tanakh. And if it was just Tanakh, that would be enough. There is pretty much constant settlement. We're talking about that it was established in the, let's say, the 9th century BCE. And it goes all the way through. You have the Israelite kings, and then the Assyrians towards the end of the 8th century BCE, of course, come in and destroy Shomron and make most of the 10 tribes into refugees. And then you have that layer, and you have that destruction. And then, of course, they brought in the Samaritans into that area. And I've done a show about the Samaritans, and that's also fascinating. And there's a lot of Samaritan synagogues in the valley right around Shomron. Then Alexander the Great shows up in the third part of the 4th century BCE with the Macedonians. And then the Hashmonaim show up in the 2nd century, mid-2nd century BCE, John Hyrcanus, and he's there. And then towards the end of the 1st century BCE, of course, you have Herod, and he's the one who renames it Sebastiya. Sebastiya in Greek meaning like the exalted one, which is the name of the emperor. Octavian is also called Augustus, which also means the exalted one. Just Sebastiya is in Greek. And he builds a huge temple on the top of Sebastiya, of the town, which you can even see from the port of Caesarea, which he also builds in honor Caesar, in honor of the Caesar. So it's a very Roman city under Herod. But you can see it even from the Mediterranean. So just layer upon layer of history there. There's a church there also. There's a Christian tradition that John the Baptist's head is actually buried there. So you can see what's going on here, just one time period after the other, and you can get into what else is going on, the context of those time periods in that one spot. I love going to places where you can use the place to talk about a lot of history, not just in the context of the place, like what else is going on around, not just the place itself, but what else is happening in the country, who the superpowers are, what are the Jews doing, what's growing there, how are they getting water there, because there is no spring on the mountain. There's a lot of chalky area, so they had a lot of cisterns not far from the Dotan Valley, where I was a couple of weeks before, also with another group. That's where Joseph is taken from a cistern, from a bor, which is a pit. It's not a well. So you can you really have to even know the geology of the area to really understand what's going on, how the people lived, where the center is, and then the outlying homesteads. Phenomenal dig that was done there over 100 years ago by Harvard, 1907, 1908, where they found ostraca. They found clay sherds with writing on it in Paleo-Hebrew, Paleo-Ivrit, in ancient Hebrew, that, now wait for it here, they're basically people in the area would have to send taxes or food, essentially. That's how they pay taxes to the king. So the king is sitting there, and you have written these lists of what was sent from what homestead or from what area, if it was oil, if it was wine, whatever it is. Of course, the best goes to the king. The Bible talks about that as well. But what's so fascinating about these particular ostraca is that they have names on it of the daughters of Tzlofchad. Remember, if you're following in the weekly Torah portion, we just talked about the daughters of Tzlofchad. Those are the 5 girls in the desert whose father is missing. There's a difference of opinion on who Tzlofchad was, because he's not in the story at all. Clearly, their father has died. They have no brothers, so they ask Moshe, like, we also want to inherit the land. And he's like so flummoxed, he kicks this upstairs to God, who says, like, of course. So on these ostraca, you have the names of the portions, of the inheritance portions of the daughters of Tzlofchad. Now, the dating of when we come in with Joshua, and then what's called the period of the judges, when the tabernacle, when the Mishkan is in Shiloh, more about Shiloh later, is all over the place, anywhere from 200 to 400 years. It's not clear. And but even if you take the lower date, and we're talking now about like, mid-9th century or so, that these ostraca are from, mid-late 9th century, then what you're saying is that hundreds of years after we come in with Joshua, and the land is divvied up, and that's the tribal area of Menashe in that area, and that's, of course, Tzlofchad, the daughters of Tzlofchad are from the tribe of Menashe. Hundreds of years after the inheritance and the portions are given out, those areas are still known by the daughters. Tirzah, second capital of Shomron, is one of the girls. But not only that, you have family names that are listed there, like the family of Aviezer, which is the family of the judge Gidon, who's from the tribe of Menashe, and who it's pretty clear, more or less, we have found Tel Ofer. We have found the Ofra of Gidon, not far from there, on the southern side of Mount Gerizim. So, like, all this stuff happening with Menashe is happening in this area. And what you have with these ostraca, though, is a very, very rare confluence of biblical names that we know about from the Bible, and from that area, written now extant, right? It's on the ostraca. Those names written outside the Bible in a different kind of a context. And villages in that area. There are still 29 villages in that area. Now, of course, they're Arab villages that carry the name, or very, very close to the name, of what's listed on the ostraca as where the food came from. So that is highly unusual and totally amazing to have that kind of proof of what's happening here. It is so exciting. And to be able to really just stand there and to talk about that and bring these girls and their love for the land of Israel, of course, to life. And it was so great because it was right during the Torah portion time when we read about them. So these are real women. Women aren't mentioned nearly as much as men in the Bible, but these women, like, they're out there, and their names are carried on in that area for a long, long time. Like I said, for hundreds of years after the inheritance is given out. So that's an amazing thing. Another amazing thing is that they found a collection of ivory there also. And there's almost like a throwaway line in the Bible when Ahab is killed, and they wash down his chariot there, and they say, like, near the ivory palace. Okay, he obviously, for Jezebel, he must have made an ivory palace. So when you find the ivory there, and that was found, tremendous collection of ivory that was found there. So then, and you look in the Bible, you're like, oh yeah, so it's from that time period. It should be one of the most exciting and one of the most accessible sites in the country. Just not just to learn about Tanakh, like I said, to learn about pretty close to a millennia of history, going all the way from when the kingdom splits. You're talking about 10th century BCE, all the way through, and even longer than a millennia if you want to count in the Christian period, the Byzantine period, and the church is there also. So you're talking about 1,500 years. Just insane. So loved guiding it. I'm imagining that you're hearing the enthusiasm that I have here, but also the frustration, really the frustration on the way that site is. And I just hope that somebody wakes up here and does something before that site is totally destroyed. But there hasn't been a proper dig there in a long, long time. Norma Franklin, who's another archaeologist, and she's dug at Jezreel, which is the other palace of Ahab and Jezebel. She actually thinks that the whole story with Navot happens there, that it makes more sense also in terms of the vineyards, because now we also know what grows well where, but just also in terms of how she found the palace and the addition to the palace, which is what he wanted the vineyards for, to extend his palace. So that would be at the opening, the northern opening into the Shomron, and you would have a palace there also that would protect your interior palace. So what we're looking for here is the elusive 10th century BCE, pretty much from mid 9th century BCE, the 800 and somethings. The Bible and archaeology is pretty much going in lockstep. It's really absolutely fascinating. before that, as I mentioned, with the period of the judges, things are unclear. And why is that 10th century so critical? Because that's essentially the time, let's say, from Solomon to Uzziah, where it's not clear. Like we have Davidic remains, and I'll talk more about that after. But the time period right after that is where we're not really sure. And that's where the biblical critics and the biblical minimalists have come in and said, no, maybe there wasn't even a Solomon. If there was, he was maybe the mayor of a smallish town. But the greatness of the kingdom is later on, and also more in Israel than in Judah. All right. So all of these finds are critically important. And of course, better methods of dating are also, be carbon-14 or things with, botanical archaeology and all these kinds of things are really like zeroing in now on this 10th century. So that is totally exciting. So that was on Monday. And that was Sebastiya, Shomron, that I was really privileged to guide. It's a great group of people, close to 30 people with me who were just, hanging on all of this because it's the history, it's Tanakh, it's other history, it's things that we know about like a little bit, but not really completely. Definitely the story about the Hashmonaim we were given in a very simple way about what happened about the 100 years of their rule. It's a lot more complicated, a lot more interesting, I think, also. And also because of my travels, like the fact that I was in Greece last year and also the year before, and I was able to learn about where the Judeans who didn't get along with the Hasmoneans went, which is into other parts of the Greek Empire. So that was like totally fascinating and illuminating some of the things that happen here, because in the end, the Hasmoneans mess up and they become what they had fought against, and they become Hellenized, and there's still a civil war that is happening at the time. It's not just a war against the Greeks. So like what's going on in the land? So unbelievable, and loved that day. And then we had delicious falafel outside of Kidumim. There's a great restaurant, and we had a beautiful lunch. Then we went to someone who makes and sells pottery in the community of Eli. And she, in addition to doing that and having a large family, her husband is he's a career army officer, which means that he gets home just for a few days every couple of weeks. So I don't think enough credit is given to the wives of the career army officers, because when they're out and doing what they have to do in the army, and the army couldn't make it without them, somebody's at home raising their kids and not just raising the kids, but doing the banking. And a lot of the things that are usually split between the couple fall on the wife. And so she's there, and she is keeping the house going and totally supporting what he is doing, which is for all of us. And I think the women sometimes deserve a little more of the credit. Not necessarily the glory, but definitely some of the credit. The couple has to be in it together, and it's a very big sacrifice, and they're making it for the country. So I wanted people to meet her. I have some of her dishes. I love them. She goes out in the morning on a walk. She's inspired by the nature of the land of Israel. And therefore, there's wheat designs and fig designs, and it's just really a great thing to see. And then we went and had some delicious wine in what you can only call a garage winery outside of Shiloh. So we were able to talk about the area as well. So that was a great trip. Love that. Love guiding for Israel Fund. Love what the organization's doing. And that was Monday. And then I had a bunch of stuff to do during the week. And then on Thursday, I got to learn. So during the week before Tisha B'Av, before the 9th of Av, Herzog College here in Gush Etzion in Alon Shvut has a whole week of learning Torah on like really high level in Hebrew, also in English. People come in from out of the country just for the learning here during that week. I've tried to go whenever I can, try and keep that week open so that I can go and learn. That they also have trips as part of that whole programming, and the trips fell out on Thursday. So I had signed up with Dr. Doron Saravi, who I've interviewed before, and who's really an incredible archaeologist and also Torah teacher. So his trip was to Tel Lachish. So now Lachish is a different story than Sebastiya Shomron. Lachish is smack in Israel proper, not far from Kiryat Gat. The reason that it hasn't been opened properly as a national park is because there are still archaeologists working there, although I think they should just open it as a national park and still have the archaeologists continue to work there. They're doing that at Masada. They're doing that at plenty of other places in Caesarea, all over the country, definitely in the city of David, which you can go to, but it's also an archaeological dig. So they've done a lot of work in Lachish, but not they haven't opened up like properly, and they don't have bathrooms, which is always an issue. But Tel Lachish was the second most important city in Judah. So it's destroyed by Sancheriv in minus 701, and it has the only remaining siege ramp from the Assyrian wars in the world, although he told us that it looks like they might have found another one at Azekah. Azekah is another town from that time period. The archaeologist who really worked there extensively was a British man, James Starkey, a Christian, who worked there in the 1930s. And he tragically was killed in 1938. He was on his way to Jerusalem for the opening for the Rockefeller Museum when he was shot and killed by Arabs. He had a white beard, so apparently they thought he was Jewish. Not only did they kill him, they also apparently totally cut him up. And so that's 1938, incidentally, before settlements, before 1967, before the state is even born. 1936 to 1939, there were tremendous Arab riots and pogroms. And 1938, or what in Hebrew ironically is Tartsach, which has the word like murder in it. Retzach is murder. There were a lot of Jews killed. Over 200 Jews were killed. It was a terrible year. James Starkey is one of the people that was also killed by the Arabs for no other reason. Like, he was on a cab on his way to Jerusalem. He wasn't bothering anybody. He wasn't doing anything. Like, we just kind of don't even think about the fact that, like, innocent people who are just trying to travel from one place to the other. And it's like, oh yeah. So, I mean, it's terrible that they murdered them, but we don't even think like, what's going on here? Like, where does this come into to some culture that you can just do that? It's terrible that we're even used to it. And I think it's actually humiliating for the Muslims that that's what people think of them. Like, if I was them, I would be appalled that that the world knows or thinks that I'm a violent people. But hey, if the shoe fits, as they say. So anyhow, so that's James Starkey. Ironically, because he doesn't continue the dig in Lachish, he had, unbeknownst to him, been taking apart the siege ramp. The archaeological methods in that last century weren't where they are right now. Yigal Yadin, who is an army general, very involved in Israeli politics, and also the one who really does the initial dig on Masada, he comes to Lachish, and because of his military background, he's able to think like the Assyrians would think and figure out like where the siege ramp would be, and also what the Judeans on the top of Lachish would have done, like their own ramp that they would have inside in order to get people to the top of the mountain and be able to fight against the siege ramp, the people coming up the siege ramp. Anyway, all this is documented. The originals are mostly in the British Museum. I believe some are in the Louvre, in what's called the Lachish reliefs. Google this, which were found in the palace in Nineveh, and they describe the war. And you can sit and see exactly where the artist who later on his work, his sketches, were used to make these reliefs, like cut in stone, like huge pictures that are cut in stone on the palace in Nineveh, boasting about the victory. You can actually see where he was sitting and the view that he had of the refugees coming out of the gate and of the siege ramp. And on the relief itself, you can also see psychological warfare. You can see that Judeans that were speared and they're like, dead and hanging on the spear at the bottom of the siege ramp, so that I assume the people at the top of the siege ramp would get freaked out and, oh my God, this is what the Assyrians are going to do to me. But what is so amazing, and this was one of the high points of embarrassing my children, was we were in the British Museum and I was looking at the relief and I was so excited because I know about the relief and I finally saw the real one. This was many years ago. And as part of the relief, they also have pomegranate trees and vineyards and date palms. So obviously this made such an impression on the artist that he even put it in a war relief. What we also learned this week, though, is that food was taken back by the Assyrians because in that part, in the desert climate of the Middle East, as opposed to in Israel, they didn't grow grapes and dates and olive trees for olive oil. So they took back the booty with them as food as well to Assyria. At the time, they just, what it's called, it's like Baal farming, meaning it's just really from the rain or from rivers if you have them. Okay, there's no like use of springs and use of levels and being able to stop up the water. It's just like whatever nature is providing you without any kind of intervention. And so they weren't able to farm, to grow those things in those parts of the world. So they they took them back from the land of Israel. But you see that. And on Shabbat, just yesterday, we were eating grapes because it's grape season. And the beautiful, like almost black grapes, they're even called sable, they grow in Lachish. They grow in that area. So from the top of the tell, I took pictures of the modern day vineyards all around the area. The Assyrian artist, if you will, army artist, who's there 2,700 years ago, was struck by the fertile area and the grapes that are growing there as well. So that's what I did in the British Museum, and watched all my kids kind of slink out of the room, was tell the other people who were in the room, listen, I live in Israel, I guide there, I know Lachish, and you could go there and you could still see the vineyards, and it's so exciting. Because I realized that, we learn the Bible and we know it's a different time and a different place. But the fact is that when you're in Israel, oh yes, it's a different time, but it's the same place. And you can make those connections, and it's just wow. It's just wow. So I learned a lot at Tel Lachish. I mean, some of it obviously was stuff. It wasn't a trip that was for tour guides. It was for everybody. So there are things that tour guides already know, but we still learned. There was at least one other tour guide who was there also, and we still learned a lot. Israel pulled out of UNESCO because of their tremendous anti-Israel stuff, and because they're taking some of Israel's heritage sites and claiming that they are Palestinian, like the tomb of the patriarchs in Shomron and the tomb of Rachel outside of Bethlehem. So Israel has left UNESCO but if we hadn't, that for sure would be a UNESCO site, because it's just an unbelievable tell of the Bible and of that time of civilization. But they're also, where they're looking is for the water system. For those of you who've been to Israel, you've probably been to Megiddo, you've probably been to Chatzor. And in that time period, so we're talking, like in the Bronze Age, even before the Iron Age, you're talking more than 3,000 years ago, it's all about the water. So you had different systems that are built in these towns that either you would go very deep down into the water table and then even underneath the city walls, but you couldn't be seen by the enemy. But anyhow, you had to have some kind of water source that was protected and stayed consistent no matter what's going on. That they have not found in Lachish. There's a very deep well that pretty much on the top. It's a little bit down off the top of the tell. It's like a 80-meter well. It goes all the way down into the riverbed, the Lachish riverbed, and that's where they would drop the water. But that wouldn't have been enough. So there is a jujube tree that's growing on the top, and shezaf in Hebrew, and they're now investigating, and it's growing beautifully, and nobody knows where the water is coming from that it's growing off of. And so now they're thinking that maybe the water system is under that tree, that it collapsed at some point, because there's also newer things on the top of the tell at that area that you find on the other sides of the tell. And what happens in a tell is the newest things are at the top, right? And the oldest things are at the bottom. But in this situation, you have older things there that you wouldn't have expected. So maybe the whole thing like collapsed on itself, and so everything's kind of upside down in that area. So that's the new thing. They have a caving expert who's come there, and that's what they're trying to investigate now. If it's possible that that's where the water system is, and the tree is giving us a clue, which is of course also really neat. And ostraca were found until Lachish also. And there was a fascinating book written by Benny Begin, because they couldn't. It was letters from somewhere else, probably Moresha, saying we can't see the fires of Azek anymore. So also talking about Sancheriv coming and the army coming and slowly conquering one city after the other. Doesn't destroy Jerusalem, and Isaiah speaks about that, right? The miracle with Hezekiah as the king, and they fix up the water system and they build a wall. So Lachish is destroyed. They don't really make that clear in the Lachish reliefs. Like he says, he has Hezekiah in a bird cage, and Hezekiah has to pay him a tremendous amount of tribute. But Jerusalem doesn't actually fall. What's interesting is when Isaiah writes about this, he's not writing about it as a refugee from Lachish, because he's sitting in Jerusalem, which doesn't get conquered with Isaiah. But you have other prophets from that same time period who are also writing about this. Micha, Amos, Hosea, but they're writing about it from a different perspective, because they're not in Jerusalem. They're out of Jerusalem, and they are actually seeing it as refugees and seeing that destruction. Later on, 115 years later, Jeremiah, and now we're talking about the Babylonians coming in, minus 586, and destroying the first temple, and the Jews, go into exile in Jerusalem. But there's not much for the Babylonians to do, because the area really does not recover after the Assyrians are here. So the Babylonians pretty much have a straight shot to Jerusalem. They don't have to go to any of the peripheral towns, because they've already been destroyed over a century before. So all of this, putting it together, like I said, putting it together with the prophets, putting it together with the ostraca, putting it together with the things that you find there, and the different pottery, of course, and other, boule and other things that are up there. It's an amazing tell. It was the administrative center. There's also a theory that they're working on now from a guy named Chris Towler that talks about how a kingdom would have expanded, right? Like you expand, you have a town, and then if it's strong, then you can expand to, let's say, 1 day's walk around it. And then if that works out well, then beyond that. And so that there's certain places that we shouldn't expect. Everyone's looking for King David, but there's certain places that we should not expect necessarily to find King David, because it's going to be later on in the kingdom. It's going to be Solomon. It's going to be Rehavam. It's going to be, Uzziah. There's going to be other kings. But a lot of this is based on Kaifa, which is a site in the Elah Valley where we believe that David and Goliath had their battle, that is a Judean fortress from that time period. And the last place that we went to after we went to Tel Lachish, we went to a place called Tel Arai, which you have probably read about in the news, because the archaeologist digging there thinks that this is biblical Ziklag. All right, so Ziklag is associated with David. He gets this city from the Philistines. Then it is destroyed by Amalek. And what's fascinating about this place that he thinks, Yossi Garfinkel thinks is Ziklag, and it's not clear, which is what I'm going to show you the conundrum here. You have Philistine remains on bedrock. So what that means is they came to a new place, okay? The Philistines, when they came to the land, most of the places that they took over were already Canaanite, Gat and Gaza and Ashdod, etc. And they continued that on, and that's why you also have Semitic names to those places. Ziklag is a Mycenaean name. So the name in itself tells you that this was like a new civilization, new people coming. So you have a clear Philistine level with like ceramics that are already not the initial Philistines. Like when they come, there's different levels of the Philistine ceramics, the development of their ceramics. So first when they come, they bring a style of ceramics like from they're called the Sea People, right? Or part of the Sea People. So from the Mediterranean, but then their ceramics undergo changes and becomes what you'd call more localized. Okay. So they have already the next generation Philistine remains there. And then you have pottery that's the exact same pottery that was found at Kaifa, which is associated with David. So this like totally fits in with the biblical text that David comes here, right? And the Philistines give him the city. And then there's a fire level, which also totally fits in with Amalek coming. And here we're talking from Samuel 1. Okay, so go look that up. Now, where is the problem here? And why are there some archaeologists, let's say Aaron Meir, for example, who is the expert on Gat, he's Tel Asafi, he's been digging there for many, many years, which is Goliath's hometown, and they just uncovered like a whole other section of it with huge buildings. It was just in the news last week, which is probably the actual Philistine Gat, and he's been, been playing around on the top, but now the real stuff is now being uncovered. But he does not think that this is Ziklag from the Bible, because the way Ziklag is described in the Bible, and specifically in Joshua 15, it would be further south. It would be an area that's given the portion of Simon and not Judah. So there's about 12 different opinions about where Ziklag is. This is one of them. But I was thinking that, and after this day, I finished this tour, which was, like I said, incredible, went back to Jerusalem, and then went up to Shiloh, where there was a Shiloh conference, and Scott Stripling, who some of you may remember, I interviewed a few months ago about the Shiloh dig. So he spoke. I have to say, he looks really nice in a suit. All the other times that I've met him, he was wearing like dusty clothes, but he presented in a suit and a tie. And at the Shiloh conference, I saw Chagi Ben Artzi, who happens to be Bibi Netanyahu's brother-in-law, but leave that aside for now. But he's a Torah scholar and I guess, semi-professional archaeologist, but he knows the land really well. And he is one of those who feels that there's an earlier date to when we come in with Joshua. It's more like minus 1400 than minus 1250, minus 1300, which is what a lot of the archaeology is showing. Now, if we come in with Joshua, according to the dates that he thinks, then the Ziklag that I went to this week can't be the Ziklag of Joshua because it only starts from the Philistines, which is later than that, which would mean that possibly there was another Ziklag. Now, that's always the default answer when one thing isn't fitting completely into what you would think it should, a place. You can say, well, there were others. And there are situations like that. There's more than one Ma'on. There's more than one Bethlehem. There's a Bethlehem up in the Galilee. There's certain places that, there's more than one Ophrah. So that's why identifying the Ophrah of Gidon took some work. So it's a default answer, but that doesn't mean that it's not true sometimes. So it could be that there was another Ziklag, which is further south, closer to the area of the Negev, closer to the area of today's Negev, closer to the area of where the allotment of Simon was, that would make sense for the way that it's listed in the Bible, because the Bible tends to list a lot of the places that are conquered more or less in geographical order. All right. You can't totally count on it, but definitely it doesn't just like bounce from place to place. So that's another possibility, which would make this Tel Arai, where I was that same day, maybe the Ziklag of David. Anyhow, it's super exciting. A lot of things are still in the lab. A lot of the ceramics, a lot of the other findings that they have there, some of the food findings, some of the ashes that are going out. A lot of things are still in the lab. A lot of these reports haven't come out, but I was like so excited to do this week and to be so involved with Biblical Tels this week that I couldn't wait to share it with you guys for in a few months' time, which I still hope to do, of course, and I've done that before, and you guys know that, to have the actual archaeologist on and explain all the ins and outs and why they got to their conclusions. So I just wanted to give you like a little preview of that I plan on doing, and just how exciting it is, like super exciting to be living in the land, to be living at a time where there's science and archaeology and all this methodology, and zeroing in, like I said, on that 10th century, and, hopefully like getting some answers as we, go more and more into the science and, of course, the Tanakh. So it was a fabulous week for me. Raised a lot of questions, a lot of answers, but also a lot of questions. And really the only way, guys, is you got to get over here and see these places for yourself. Again, none of these places are yet open as national parks where you can go in a proper way, but you could definitely go, with a guide, with somebody who knows what to show you and talk about all these things that are just like coming together. And for the last century, and just illuminating our understanding of the ancient world and how it rolled, where the administrators' centers were for food and for water, and where the population centers were. Towns were not nearly as big as they are today. I mean, if you had, a few thousand people, that was already considered large. And how people worshipped. So at the entrance to Lachish, just inside the gate, you have two altars, originally four-horned, and then two of the horns are taken off each one, with a big stone with a hole in it on the top, which is a toilet. So this is clearly a place where somebody had been doing some kind of pagan ritual that somebody else wasn't happy about, and they literally took it apart and made it, not a holy place anymore. By putting a toilet on is pretty much how that's going to be. So the symbolism in that as well. I asked Doron, because we have a toilet with parasites in it and remnants of a kind of grass that still grows wild around Jerusalem today in the city of David in what's called Area G. But I don't know if that was just because the people there were rich and had some kind of indoor plumbing. I mean, you're talking about the First Temple period, very unusual to have that. Or if it also had been to desecrate, if you will, something pagan. So it's also illuminating how people worshiped. Remember, in the ancient world, there were no atheists. Everybody was worshiping, but usually gods. And it's Abraham and it's the Bible who emphasized the one God, the monotheistic side of things. But there's a lot of a lot of different gods in this part of the world, and you have the Philistines, and you have the Canaanites, and everyone with their own personal god and their own personal worship and their altars and their sacrifices, and, trying to like pull all that together and figure out who was doing what when, what fits in with the reforms that the Bible talks about, both of Hezekiah and Yoshiyahu at the very, very end of the First Temple period. Also the same thing that we find in a lot of places. We find that in Shiloh. We find that all around the country where you'll have an altar like stuck in the wall. So clearly somebody wasn't happy about that. Interesting theory about the origins of the synagogue also, because the synagogue, also it's a place of worship, obviously, mainly that takes root, after the temple is destroyed, because before that, you're supposed to go on pilgrimage to the temple, and that was the one place where you're really supposed to worship, although prayer happens everywhere because it happens spontaneously. Everybody's praying all the time, not necessarily in an organized fashion at all. But the gates to the city are very important places all through the Bible. They talk about the importance of the gate. When Abraham buys the tomb to bury Sarah in, it's at the gates of the city with the Hittites, and all through Boaz and the Levirate marriage, the gates of the city of Bethlehem, and all the way through. But there was also ritual worship at the gates of the city, because when you finally made it there, if let's say you were bringing some kind of whatever it is, you're bringing something that you bring, that you're delivering to the city. First of all, you're grateful that you got there safely. Okay, talking about the roads today and getting hit by rocks. Okay, so traveling it should be safer today, but unfortunately, because of terrorism, traveling is not as safe as it should be today, even when you get on a plane. That started here, it didn't end here. So you would be grateful, and you would, of course, say thank you to whatever God it was you were worshiping. And so we see this also in Tel Dan up north, areas of ritual and areas where there was an altar, and you would be thankful to whoever. And so, maybe that kind of area then moves over and translates itself into the synagogue, which is like a place specifically that's used for ritual. Not really clear. Fascinating idea. I'll investigate that more and get back to you guys on that. But how things that we think about today developed, because most people who are involved in an organized religion, there is a place of worship that you do or don't go to, be it a synagogue, be it a church, be it a mosque, etc. It wasn't always like that, though. And so whenever there's a change, you have to ask yourself, well, why was there a change? And why did that change stick and another change not stick? And why did it start off one way and then move into another way? And which way is it pointing? So, right, so like, Jewish synagogues point towards Jerusalem. Most apses of churches point east. The Samaritan synagogues, like what I was telling you, we found around a good number of them in the valley around Shomron, around Sebastiya, point to Mount Gerizim because that's their holy site. Do you not have to have it pointing in any direction? I'm sure there's other religions who just wherever you are. So the whole thing is just unbelievable. And here we have thousands of years in this small country. We have thousands of years and so many levels of civilization to investigate, to learn about, to share with the world. And I'm so thrilled that I live in a country that does that is happy about finding a 9,000-year-old Neanderthal town at which they found outside Jerusalem. I mean, they found it was just publicized a couple of weeks ago also, and the excitement of that and just the excitement of everything all the time. So the archaeologists are really having a heyday here, and I love learning all this, turning it around to teach it, and just like going through my mind, like different possibilities, and could it be this and could it be that, and asking the questions. Don't necessarily need the answers, although answers are nice, but answers really need to be written in pencil. Does anybody use pencil anymore? You know what I'm saying. For those of you in my demographic, you know what pencils were, because you have to be open enough also and have enough of, or, lesser amount of arrogance and ego, if you're an archaeologist, to be able to say, whoa, just found something new. All that whole theory that I had, that I built my career on, doesn't hold anymore because of the new things that we have found, and realize what a dynamic situation it is. And really, you do your best for the time that and what you're digging and the information that's available to you at the time. But then new things pop up, new sites are dug that bear very, very close relationship to what you're digging and can suddenly shed light on something and, put it in a different context. So absolutely fascinating. And I really hope that those of you who come here, for whatever reason that you're coming here, also go to at least some of the Biblical Tels, even if you're coming here for the food, which incidentally is a great reason to come to Israel. I cannot believe how good the food is here and getting better all the time. You can do that. You can come on a high-tech tour. You can come for a gazillion reasons. You can come to Israel. But try and get out to at least one of the Biblical Tels because it really just like, humanity, we share things with people who lived so long ago, some really basic things, some really basic needs like, want to keep our families together and having water and having food, etc. And also for many of us, an understanding that there's a much bigger picture beyond what we're understanding. But just the development of mankind. And sometimes I look around and I think maybe they were smarter than we are now, right? Like, what do they say? That the next war is going to mean that the war after that, World War, is going to be us fighting with sticks, right? Because now what we've done is just create things that can destroy on a much greater level. So you see the destruction of Sancheriv, and you see the destruction of other, wars that came through here in Sargon and Babylon and everybody who just came through here and Alexander the Great. But they were limited because their weaponry was limited to that site. And now you have, situations where you could destroy a lot more and kill a lot more people in just one push of a button. So while we think that we're moving along and we're becoming more civilized and smarter, in some ways, maybe it was better then, because there was a limit to how much destruction could be had. And this is where wisdom comes in, leadership, and also faith, and hoping that, we keep control of things. Anyway, I got to get to sleep. I got a long day tomorrow, and who knows, I may get called to help deliver a baby. So I'm out of here. I want to thank Ben and Tabitha for helping me put this show out. You guys can, of course, always write to me, eve@thelandofisrael.com. Got some great feedback on my last interview with Adrian Gold-Davis and the one beforehand as well with Mike Huckabee. Love hearing from all of you. You can also always go onto my website, www.eveharo.com. You can contact me through there. Also love to come to your communities and share Israel with you wherever you happen to be. So be in touch and have a great week, everybody. Eve Haro, Rejuvenation on the Land of Israel Network. Take care, everybody. Goodbye for now.
Josh Easton here, host of Israel Uncensored on the Land of Israel Network at thelandofisrael.com. And on my show this week, the one and only Mark Zell, Chairman, Republicans Overseas in Israel, also the Vice President and General Counsel of Republicans Overseas Worldwide. Get his take on the Twitter battle between President Donald Trump and the three squad, as they're called, congresswomen, two of them scheduled to arrive here in Israel. Listen to what Mark has to say about the fact that Israel is letting these two anti-Semitic congresswomen into the country. What are your thoughts on that? Listen to the show only here on the Land of Israel Network at thelandofisrael.com. Israel Uncensored.